For the last unit, we will look at service recovery. So you took your car for a service and you thought, well, it's the second service, but now you drive home and then the next day you see a massive pool of oil underneath your car. I mean, it was just service. Okay, so from a service organization's perspective, how do you manage service recovery? And it just so happens that a lot of mistakes can happen, but you as a service organization need to make sure you recover properly. And we will go through several ways, as well as the importance of effective service recovery for Unit 10, Chapter 14. A few learning outcomes. Justify the value of developing and implementing a service recovery strategy. Describe the outcomes of service recovery. Describe the customer complaint handling process. Identify and apply the dimensions of service recovery. Relate the importance of justice and fairness to service recovery. Highlight the importance of empowering frontline staff to facilitate service recovery, because it is not always the manager or the person in the workshop that has to deal with this. It is most likely the frontline administrative staff who gets the front or the main bear of a very angry customer. So let's see how they can be empowered to deal with these circumstances. As a brief introduction, all of a service organization's efforts to satisfy customer needs, to deliver services of high quality, and to retain loyal customers will mean nothing if the organization cannot solve a service delivery problem or resolve a customer complaint. Let me take a personal example. You bought a new car from a very reputable dealership, and the salesperson was very sufficient and handling your query, dealing with all of the paperwork for the finance application and so on. And everything went smooth. Your car was delivered to you and you were so satisfied. They celebrated with you on their social media pages, and now you are very satisfied and happy. So it was a high quality service experience. Your needs were satisfied, and I decided to become loyal to this dealership. But then with the first service, something unfortunate happens. They did not install the oil filter properly, and then I ended up with a puddle of oil. So now, if they do nothing to solve this service delivery with the same or even more effort than it took to sell the car to me in the first place, it means nothing, because now I'm aggravated, I'm no longer loyal, and then most likely will take it to another dealership for the next service. But if they handle the service recovery properly, they apologize and they ensure me that it will not happen again, and they will make sure it will be done properly next time, and maybe I will remain with this dealership and take it back for a service there once more. If service failures occur, there are strategies that this service organization can adopt and use to return customers to a state of satisfaction, as I just mentioned. The marketing concept is supposed to be the philosophy that guides all marketing decision making. It should lead to an organization-wide customer orientation, which places the understanding of customer needs and wants at the center of the efforts to tailor product or service offering to satisfy those needs. For example, a dealership should not necessarily focus only on their turnover and profits, but on the customer's needs to pay a little less for the same car from another dealership, and they want it to be altered in some way to satisfy their needs, and then the dealership should make sure this is focused on more than satisfying their own figures and profits. But unfortunately, many organizations fail to implement the marketing concept properly during their daily activities, and this unfortunately happens in many service organizations. And this can most likely be to a lack of training or a lack of standard procedures in place. The situation-specific and immediate nature of service delivery and service failure calls for relatively speedy and effective attempts to recover from poor service delivery. If this dealership told me that I have to wait another week for my car to be fixed after it was just released from their workshop the past 2 days, then it will definitely not be to my satisfaction, and it will definitely not be a successful service recovery. So it needs to be effective and speedy as well. If it is properly performed or executed, the service recovery can restore the customer satisfaction, as I also mentioned, to pre-disconfirmation levels, and some authors even suggest to levels higher than pre-disconfirmation levels. So if they do it properly, effectively and speedy, I might be even more satisfied. It is also important to know that not all dissatisfied customers complain, and we will get to several reasons for why customers do not complain. So to introduce the nature of service recovery, this can be defined as a thought-out planned process for returning aggrieved customers to a state of satisfaction with the organization after a service or product has failed to live up to expectations. Service recovery refers to a complaints handling system that aims to rectify problems as they occur, so a reactive process, as well as to monitor the service delivery process in an attempt to identify problem areas before they occur, being proactive. So it is best to have a checklist and another person in the workshop to double check the work that's just been done on a vehicle. It might be redundant, it might be double work, but it is always best for a workshop supervisor to just double check the work. Not that they don't trust the technicians, but it might be helpful to avoid situations like not properly fitting the oil filter, for example, which is a very simple task. Let's have a look at several causes of service failures. So, service failure implies the inability of a service organization to meet customer expectations. So, what are several examples or causes of service failures? The first one we can refer to is malfunctioning. And this can be, for example, a ride in a theme park, like Gold Reef City not operating for technical reasons. Also, incorrectness. This can be, for example, a tax consultant who miscalculates a customer's tax liability, and this can be a problem. Unavailability. This refers to an attorney who does not keep an appointment. Say you take your car to the dealership because you had an appointment for your second service to take place, but then they just tell you when you pitch up, no, we are full today, even though you made an appointment. And then also lateness. If an ambulance is too late to the scene of an accident. Also slowness. A vehicle is supposed to be ready for pickup after repairs is not ready on time. So you took your vehicle for the service and they told you that it will be done within 4 hours. And then it's no need to notify you because you can just pick up after 4 hours. And then when you get to the service center, it's not ready within these stipulated 4 hours. Then it's slow. So it's best to just have someone call you once it's done and not promise on a time. And then also uncaring, impolite, unresponsive, unknowledgeable staff as one. So this kind of speaks to itself. You had something happen or you wanted to book in your car and they are very impolite or they do not respond to your email requests. They are not caring and also unknowledgeable because they cannot give you simple information. For example, what constitutes the 30,000 kilometer service for your specific model vehicle. But then also, let's have a look at service recovery and its outcomes. So service recovery ought to be part of a service organization's quality management strategy with the ultimate objective of being to maintain the business relationship with the customer, because if you don't do this, you will definitely not maintain a relationship with me, the dissatisfied customer. You need to make sure it's in place. But then again, effective service recovery leads to enhanced perceptions of the quality of products and services already bought, enhanced perceptions of the organization's competence, and a favorable image in terms of perceived quality and value. Yes, we don't expect service failure to occur that much, but unfortunately, mistakes can happen because of human involvement or even system failure that happens as well. But then, from the organization's perspective, effective service recovery, with the keyword being effective, that can lead to enhanced perceptions of the quality. Although we don't expect these things to malfunction, it does happen. But then failure to ensure customer satisfaction by means of service recovery leads to decline in customer confidence, lost customers, negative word of mouth, potential negative publicity, and direct cost of reperforming the service. So again, it's a great example. Now they had to take my car back to the workshop, costing them someone else's car that they could have done in the same time space. They have to redo that, make sure everything else is in place. And then if they don't do this properly, they will definitely lose me as a customer, as I mentioned prior. So that is really what happens when a service organization fails to ensure customer satisfaction and have effective service recovery in place. This should also be familiar with you, the equation that you can see, performance and expectations. So there are three circumstances, and this should be familiar. Performance equals expectations. So you expected a certain service delivery outcome, and the organization delivered as expected. That's P equals E. But then it can also be where performance exceeds expectations. For example, P larger than E, and then also three outcomes if P is smaller than expectations. So you are very disappointed in that regard. But there are three outcomes specifically for when the performance exceeds the expectations, and this will enhance the customer's attitude towards the service provider because they out-delivered themselves. It will enhance retention, repeat purchases, and loyalty towards the service provider, and it will also lead to positive word-of-mouth communication. Usually when we are satisfied with a product or a service organization, we tend to tell people about that. whether it's in person word of mouth or online word of mouth. When a customer complains about poor service delivery, the service provider can deny any wrongdoing and ignore the customer, and this is a situation of denial. But this is never a good thing to do for a service organization. The alternate is the service provider will acknowledge the service failure and decide on the following based on its service recovery in place. What can be done to recover a certain scenario? For example, they can say, book my car in again, and they can make sure everything is in place so that it does not leak oil or anything else going wrong. Who should execute the recovery? Well, hopefully the workshop technician should do that, or the mechanic, and then hopefully with the supervisory eye of the workshop supervisor, and then how quickly can it be done? If it was a major malfunction where the gearbox no longer works, it's going to take a few days to inspect and to really check where the problem lies. But if it's a oil filter not being attached correctly or installed correctly, then it can be quick to resolve that. And then also an important thing that I mentioned at the start is, why do customers not complain? Now you have a customer that took their car for a 30,000 kilometer service, and the same thing happened. They discovered a oil pool the next day, but then some of them just will leave it. They will quickly take it to a mechanic that they are familiar with, because they might think that, no, this is simple to fix, and not go all the way back to the dealership, and they just don't complain. They have it fixed elsewhere, and that's it. That's the end of it. Or you get people in a restaurant and they receive food they did not order necessarily, and then they just leave it. They just stick with it and eat it, even though it's not what they wanted in the first place. So why do customers not complain? So first one, they believe it's not worth the time and effort, because they might have the perception that they don't want to cause a ruckus because of the, for example, amount of money paid. But I can almost guarantee, if it was a gearbox situation on a car and it cost 15,000 Rand, someone will complain. So there might be factors that determine that they might not believe it's worth the time, and this might be linked to the cost of the service. They also believe it will not make a difference. They do not believe that anything will be done about the problem. So yes, it might be that they can just deny any wrongdoing on their part, and it will not make a difference to complain. They believe that no one is interested. It's possible that customers don't complain because they can throw a fit, they can raise their concerns, but they really believe that management or the waitress or the service organization does not really care. They don't believe they are interested. They do not know how to complain. Just a typo there. There are no procedures or facilities in place, so they don't have any clue. They didn't know about Hello Peter. They didn't know about the customer care line or anything like that. So they don't know how to do it physically. And also they fear victimization and or embarrassment. And sadly, this happens a lot. People feel embarrassed that maybe they made the mistake, or it's something they did wrong, or they just want to avoid feeling embarrassed if they complain, especially something small like receiving the wrong milkshake or receiving the wrong food. But even fearing victimization, in certain instances, you don't want to complain because you will be victimized, and that's why people just leave it. On the next snippet, there's a video, and I will definitely link this one. It's if you are familiar with the program of Gordon Ramsay, the famous chef, he hammers on a customer that complained in a newly renovated restaurant. So I'll see if a little bit will play. If not, please watch the video as linked on Ifundi.
The first customers of the night are responding well to the new menu.
You have to taste this. This is absolutely unbelievable. Best food I ever had.
Amazing.
But even good food can't impress everybody.
Absolutely terrible. Even I can do better. That's horrible.
So now you can also see that despite your best efforts as a service organization, some people might find it favorable, and there will still be people that will find something wrong with it. So watch the video to see how Gordon reacts to this lady. Right, there are also several dimensions of service recovery that we will have a look at. And basically the 14 dimensions that delineate the domain of service recovery are time, level of atonement, apology, communication style, fair fix, empathy, accepted responsibility, kept promises or reliability, feedback, empowerment, access or approachability, tangibles, staff attitude, and explanation. So all of these dimensions should be focused on for effective service recovery, and I will have a look at these briefly. If we look at time in the context of service recovery, this refers to the speed with which the customer complaint is resolved. So I complained on the Telkom website because my internet isn't working, for example. And then in terms of time, how long do they take to process your ticket, sending out a technician? Or going back to the dealership for the car mishap, how long do they take to deal with it? Do they tell you, yes, ma'am, it's going to be this day? Or no, ma'am, sorry, you have to wait another 2 weeks. Atonement refers to the extent to which the service provider makes amends for the service failure. So how do they amend? How do they atone for the mistake on their part? It can also refer to some value-added compensation. For example, they tell you that your next service will be free, or you will get 1 month free on your internet contract, a discount, preferential seating, a voucher, and so forth, so that they ensure they can restore the ratio of inputs to outputs and making it up, per se, to the customer for what occurred. Apology refers to the service organization or employee providing an apology to the customer for any inconvenience caused by the service failure. For the dealership, they will just state that, sorry, this happened. We will make sure we fix it as soon as possible, and we really do apologize for the inconvenience caused for missing a day at work or whatever the case may be. Then for the communication style, this refers to the manner in which service employees address the customer lodging the complaint. And this is very, very important. It should be professional, and the tone of communication should also reflect professionalism and a willingness to assist the customer, even if the customer is being aggressive. I know this might sound silly, but yes, customers, when they are angry or feel wronged, they will go on the attack, and not all consumers or customers do it in a professional manner. But as a service organization, you cannot fight aggression with aggression. You will never win. You will probably make the situation worse. So if you do it calmly, professionally, and your tone is positive, then you might calm the customer down to ensure them that you are working on the situation and you are more than willing to assist to fix the problem. So there are also styles of communication described as the convergence communication style and maintenance communication style. Convergence refers to communication style in which the service provider uses a range of strategies to signal liking, helpfulness, similarity, or understanding. Vocally, verbally, and non-verbally, the service provider becomes more like the customer during these communication behaviors. But then again, do not mimic the customer's behavior, rather be a consistent professional and friendly and helpful communicator. And then a maintenance style is similar to standardized approach to service. There is no effort to change or move towards the customer, vocally, verbally, or non-verbally. And this is basically the status quo. To really focus on effective, satisfying service recovery, rather use convergence and professionalism. In terms of fair fix, this refers to the core services being performed correctly the second time. If you can get the customer to trust you enough to return to your service center, then make sure it's done properly the second time and ensure them that a workshop assistant or a workshop supervisor will double check the work before your car leaves the workshop. For empathy is defined as caring, individualized attention that the organization provides to its customers. Empathy entails treating the customer in a way that shows that the service provider cares about the problem by fixing it and lessening the customer's inconvenience. So yes, anything can go wrong on a service. It might be the oil filter for some. It might be a misfiring spark plug for another. You have to make sure that you have individualized attention to your customers. In terms of accepted responsibility, and for many service organizations this is difficult, they might go into the denial, denying any wrongdoing on their part, telling the customer, no, it might be your fault. But there are several things we need to consider in terms of accepted responsibility. First, it refers to who takes the blame or responsibility for the service failure, whether this is in front of the customer or once the customer left. It can be the manager taking responsibility, it can be the workshop technician or mechanic taking responsibility. But some way or another, someone has to accept responsibility for it to go wrong, and then just to make sure it never happens again. But then customers evaluate a service failure and how blame for the failure is attributed according to three concepts. The first one is locus of control. So who is responsible for the service failure? The customer or the service provider? Did the customer break their internet wires, or is the fault a stolen cable from Telkom, for example, where now they don't have access to internet? In terms of controllability, did the responsible party have control over the cause of the failure? If a cable was stolen, then no, Telkom didn't have any control over this happening. But if the customer accidentally cut the wires, then yes, they did. Then the last one is stability. Is it likely that the failure will happen again? In other words, causes of failure can be relatively temporary. In terms of the telecom example, yes, cables get stolen all the time, damaged all the time. So yes, that might occur again. But in terms of the service for your car, that should not happen again. It will not instill any credibility or trust in the customer if that happens again. In terms of kept promises and reliability, this refers to the service provider keeping its promises or doing what it said it was going to do when attempting to recover from service failure. So if there was a major issue with your service afterwards and you took your car back, then are they keeping the promises to fix what they said they will? And if they said, for example, we will throw in a free valet, they should throw in the free valet because they promised it. Then feedback. This refers to the situation in which once the problem is solved, the service organization provides information about the problem and what is being done to resolve it. Okay, so you have absolutely no mechanical background, you have no idea how cars work, but you discover this pool of oil the next day. Taking back your car, they quickly have a look at it, and then they tell you, no, it is a specific seal in the specific compartment of this part of your engine, and that is what is leaking. It's not your oil filter. They have to provide feedback as to what exactly went wrong. If you report a faulty internet connection, then they can track where a specific system or a cable is broken or stolen, and then they can report back, okay, listen, this is exactly what went wrong, and this is why you don't have internet. In terms of empowering your employees, and we will get to that later in the video as well, this relates to giving employees the authority to act and refers to the resources to which the employees have access and decisions that they are permitted to make. You want to empower your frontline employees, for example, as we have covered in this unit, to, for example, make it up to the customer, writing out a voucher to tell them, we are sorry for what happened, this is a voucher for a free valet, or whatever the case may be. You also want to empower them to directly deal with the customer, to give them some information. It does not help that you have frontline employees that has no knowledge of any mechanics or anything about the service process. For example, if they cannot even tell you what the 45,000 kilometer service entails for your specific model of car, then they are not empowered to really effectively help customers. They need to be empowered by means of training. Then access or approachability refers to whether it is possible for customers to lodge complaints, whether there are staff members who are assigned specifically to handle customer complaints, and whether complaints are encouraged rather than discouraged by staff. So Telkom Online has a complaints portal where there's a very efficient place where you can find a specific thing that's wrong, whether it's not being able to connect, whether you cannot dial a number on a landline or anything like that, and then you can log a fault that way. So there's a designated portal and designated staff that gets back to you, or a designated customer care line that you can phone. Then tangibles refers to the appearance and standard of employees' dress, the equipment they use, and the physical environment in which staff handle complaints. And then staff attitude refers to whether the service provider's employees are friendly and considerate when dealing with customers, and this goes hand in hand with the communication. It should always be professional and cordial. If you approach staff and you are disgruntled because you paid for a service and it wasn't done properly because now you have more damage coming out of the service, you don't want to find an employee that is dismissive or has attitude towards you. You want to find friendly staff willing to assist you and to resolve this as quickly as possible. Then lastly, explanation. This refers to whether the service provider explains to the customer why the problem occurred in a clear, concise manner. So this goes hand in hand with feedback. So why did it occur? Okay, the staff member was in a bad mood, or they are doing an apprenticeship, and then that is why the oil filter wasn't installed properly. And then you just need to make sure there's someone that supervises them in the first place. So make sure you understand these concepts. To continue on the dimensions of service recovery, we also need to know how to measure customer satisfaction with service recovery. Ideally, a service organization should measure and assess how customers perceive their service recovery efforts after a service failure. So you don't necessarily just want to receive feedback after selling a vehicle. You want to receive feedback from customers after the service recovery efforts. So you've taken back the car because of the service center failure, workshop failure, and now the situation was dealt with. And now you also want to get feedback from your customers, as difficult or challenging that might seem. But then there's also a system or measurement instrument that was developed to deal with this exactly. So the Rekovsat measurement, this is an instrument that measures satisfaction with service recovery and is based on what service customers would expect of a service organization recovering from a service failure like the workshop malfunction. So how was this developed? The initial empirical work attempted to determine what customers expect of service organizations once a service failure had occurred and a complaint had been lodged. So usually this takes place based on a previous video that we covered, the research process. So typically they would have had focus groups or interviews to get an idea of what people would expect typically from a service failure once that occurred. And then they could come up with several dimensions, which we will get to. And then what happened was that complaining customers were asked about their satisfaction with the actions of the recovering organization. And then they came up with the 6 dimensions. And this is communication, empowerment, feedback, atonement, explanation, and tangibles. And this is very similar to the dimensions of service recovery. But these are specific to the RECOVSAT measurement instrument. And you can read more about this on page 357. So now you've taken your car back to the dealership, or you logged your lack of internet access to Telkom, and now you have certain perceptions of the justice or fairness of how this was dealt with. Now, the equity theory suggests that a complaining customer will evaluate the fairness of the complaint handling process from 3 specific perspectives. So the perceived justice is a 3-dimensional concept, including the outcome fairness. So did you receive a refund or anything like that? So this is distributive justice. Was there any procedural fairness? Did they reply in 2 days or 2 weeks? So that is procedural justice. Was there interactional fairness? For example, the attitude of the business or the employees that dealt with your query. And this is interactional justice. So more of this starting on page 358. And now a last thing that we want to refer to is how to manage your service recovery. In terms of empowerment, this is an essential requirement for effectively implementing a service recovery strategy. And this is the decision to empower frontline staff to handle and resolve complaints if and when appropriate without managerial intervention. You don't always want, as a manager, imagine as a manager of a service organization, you don't want to handle all of the small to large queries, because this can be quite a lot. You want your frontline staff to be empowered to deal with the smaller cases unless they insist on seeing the manager, because it cannot be resolved satisfactorily for the customer. So what happens when frontline employees are appropriately empowered? These staff members tend to enjoy their jobs more because they feel they have the power to resolve queries. They are more motivated. They feel more valued by their boss and their organization because they can resolve a lot of these things. Also, they find their jobs more interesting, and they report higher levels of self-esteem because they are in a position of empowerment. In terms of service guarantees, a service guarantee is an explicit commitment by the service organization that its service will fully meet customers' expectation. This commitment is often expressed in writing or by means of marketing communication material, such as an advertisement. For example, you have a 5-year, 100,000 kilometer guarantee or warranty on your vehicle. How can service guarantees be effective, though? For a service guarantee to be effective, it must be unconditional, it must be easily understood and communicated, it must be meaningful, it must be easily invoked, and have compensation offered that is easy to collect. When do service guarantees work best? So when the services are expensive, the negative impact of unresolved problems or complaints is significant, the buyer resistance is high, customer expertise is low, the industry has poor image, the organization depends heavily on repurchases, and the influence of negative word of mouth can be devastating. That brings us to the end of this video lesson. Hopefully by now you know exactly how to implement the service monitoring process, but to end it all off, to know how to recover your service bloopers and blunders effectively, considering all the dimensions and the importance of recovering successfully and not being the organization that's constantly in denial. Yes, it happens where the customer is perceived to be guilty and the organization is not guilty of any wrongdoing, but there are still ways to handle that as well. So hopefully you understand service recovery after this lesson.